thousands took part in the insurrection on Capitol Hill, which saw Trump supporters break into the Capitol, attempting to stop the certification of electoral college votes for the presidential election. The break-in delayed proceedings, but Biden was certified as president-elect hours later by Congress, which hours before cowered behind barricades in fear for its members' lives. Now, 5 people died because of the insurrection, including a Capitol police officer, Brian Sitnick, and an Air Force veteran, Ashley Babbitt, was shot while attempting to break into the Capitol. It is clear the insurrectionists were all Trump supporters and mostly members of white supremacist organizations. The president was impeached for a second time for inciting the crowd to invade the Capitol and take actions tantamount to those of sedition. There have been over 100 arrests, with 200 more suspects identified, and 2 men have been charged with violence against the police. Now, this unprecedented assault on the seat of government of the leader of the Western democracies and the ease with which it occurred begs many questions. I'm putting these to a longtime former resident of America, Dr. Wendy Dye, and former Talk Africa, now Channel 7 broadcaster, Candy Kase. Ladies, a real pleasure to have you both here. Now, can I just give you a little bit of background to this program? Let me fess up. This is actually a trial broadcast of a new strand of programming that I'm wanting to put forward. It's called Speaking Up. And if I tell you what Speaking Up is about, it may inform the way you answer the questions and get into the discussions we're going to have later on. It's long been my view that mainstream society believes that Black folk don't have a point of view. They don't have opinions, neither do they have a voice. So through Speaking Up, I'm wanting to demonstrate to mainstream society and to the rest of our community that yes, we're here. Yes, we have a voice. Yes, we're deeply thoughtful people. And yes, we're people with a plan for their future. So, ladies, that's where we are. This is all about speaking up. Now, so look, let's start off with Wendy. Wendy, what does the whole insurrection event tell us about race relations in the USA, in your opinion? You've lived there over 20 years. You've seen some of these cycles come and go, but nothing as dramatic as that. But what does it tell us about race relations in the United States of America?
No, thank you. That's an interesting question. I have for over 22 years, to 2000. But before that, I had interactions with a lot of African Americans and other Americans, but African Americans who were role models,
right?
Really, and especially those who came up through the civil rights era. I think what happened with this current insurrection was a crystallization of events that took a long time coming. This was something that had been building up for a long time. Many people had fought for race equality, were aware of it, for equity, equality. But famously, even though there have been and there continue to be people who are great leaders, many people they know it, but it's kept within the community, so they haven't spoken up much about it, not openly, so it hasn't been discussed in the mainstream. Recently, with the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and all the other many spoken and unspoken unnecessary deaths, in my opinion, these came to the fore. And then you have to remember that we're living in a post-Obama setting. And during the time that Obama was in power, he was not a race president, even though he was Black and he raised the hopes of many Black people. He did not necessarily serve the interests of Black people, not so much. And then the third point I'll make to tie everything I'm thinking together is this insurrection, this current insurrection, reminds me of an insurrection that was captured on film. The film's called The Birth of a Nation, by a young man called Nate Parker, about the 1831 rebellion of Nat Turner, who was an African American black slave in Virginia. He led an insurrection against the slaveholders who were imprisoning and torturing and making work for free people of African origin in the Americas. If you compare the two settings, the insurgents in Nat Turner's case were summarily executed down. If you look at the insurrection of today, people are being treated very differently. I'm not even going to go into how Black Lives was treated recently with the police. So I think that in all, race relations have come to the point where they are crystallized, where people are now speaking up. It's not that they didn't speak up before, but there was no platform. Now wide open, and people are speaking up. So that would be my initial perspective on race relations.
Okay. All right. Candy, I've got to ask you this. All the experts I've spoken to, and a lot of the research that's coming out through the media, is that the Capitol isn't a place you just breeze into and walk into people's offices. It's an absolute labyrinth. It's even more complicated than the Houses of Parliament. Anybody who's been to the Houses of Parliament knows that somebody has to guide you to know where to go to reach which hall and so on. So were you surprised with the ease with which people busted into the Capitol, Candy?
I was, but you see, if you cast your mind happened regarding the Black Lives Matter, they marched in front, not even they didn't even get on the steps. They just marched in front of Capitol Hill to make that point. Because say that the Capitol Hill is the seat of government in America, and therefore you want to be near the steps of Capitol Hill. If you saw the army, the guards that were ready with their guns cocked, anyone who did anything, it would have been amazing. If anyone climbed, dared to climb like they did, dared where the guns. A terrible insurgence, and there were people, regardless of what color they were, that there were terrorists out to attack the people inside, the workers inside. Now, workers inside could have been judges, lawyers, ministers, senators, and all of the work. What was going on? And for me, that shows you disparity between the fact that if you're white, you're not a threat to anybody. You have to be either black or look Arabic to be terrorists. So they allow these people to climb walls to enter, to get on the stairs. Nobody got on the stairs when the Black Lives Matter people were marching past. They did not. It was a quiet, determined, but there was no violence at all, and yet people were killed. People were killed. People were shot at. And for me, watching from the UK, it was a big thing. It was a shocking thing.
What was your take? What was your immediate takeaway from that observation, Candy?
Immediately it showed me that there are different laws for different people, and it's the color of your determines what you are to the
laws that are
armed
applied.
forces, the police, etc. If you were black people, they gun them down without a. And
Right.
what is interesting also is the fact that after the lady was shot, I forgot Bobbitt or whatever her name was.
Ashley Babbitt.
Yes, Babbitt. They then
Yeah.
people were saying that an inquiry should not come. She was shot. What was going on? Hello, has there been an inquiry? Forget about all the innocent black people walking to their work or to the shops that have been killed. Let us just look at Black Lives Matter non-violent marches where people are shot. Have we ever heard of an inquiry? Have we? Why would you suggest an inquiry for somebody who was physically vicious and ready to kill? These people came armed.
Okay, point made. Now, Wendy, I mean, it just segues into the next question. What people are calling this classical examples of what they call white privilege. And but there's something else with your kind of awareness and understanding of how the American system works. How come people got such good intel about the inner workings, the runnings of the Capitol? And secondly, why were the defenses to the Capitol so pathetic? I mean, Candy's just been talking about rows of armed guards for a peaceful protest. And here are people who are coming to the Capitol armed, and they've walked through the defenses like a hot knife through butter. What is your takeaway from that? What does that tell you with your knowledge of the American system?
Well, the image that comes to me from what Candy said was the lines of National Guardsmen, armed National Guardsmen, who were guarding the statue of Lincoln, Black Lives Matter. They were trying to protect a issue that Black people would never go for. They would go for the Confederate statues. So there was also an imbalance of perspective and priority there. Could you ask that question again? It's a two-part question.
Oh, well,
the Capitol. I've got it.
What I'm saying is that one, they ran through the defenses like a hot knife through butter.
Yes.
And secondly, they seem to have amazing intelligence about the inner workings of the Capitol. How come?
I've got it.
I mean, this is one of the most secure pieces of real estate in the United States of America. What does that tell you?
It tells me that, and this is my opinion because I could be wrong and lots of people are speculating, but I happen to think that not that it's an inside job, but these people, these insurgents, these what we would call uncivilized, barbaric supremacists had spent years, decades, if not years, infiltrating the different armed forces and different arms of government, so that it's possible that it was an insult in many ways, that maybe a lot of the people they just came armed, they were told, we'll bring you a coach, but there were or must have been leaders. And these people had been primed, they had been shown where to go, because from what I understand, it is a labyrinth in there. And also a lot of the forces were the armed forces that would have protected the Capitol had stayed away, or when they were needed, could not come because President Trump would not call them to come. And so it had to take a sort of not measured, but a desperate call. We call those the National Guard of neighboring states and finally come in and help. And by then, the Capitol had been stormed. So it tells me inside job and years of slow preparation, just to make sure that they had their people in key positions so that when it was time to strike, everything would move like clockwork.
Okay. Now, I mean, the words I was expecting one of you to say was white privilege, in the differential way in which, white protesters, even terrorists, are treated, as opposed to black protesters. And the question I'm going to come to now, just to round off this section, looking at your takeaways of the situation in America, is that it's now writ large. Everybody can see that when it's a dark-colored demonstrator, he's met with lethal force. If it's a light-colored demonstrator, they more or less get away with what they're doing. In fact, the charges that have been read were all charges of the most ridiculous kind. Trespassing, stealing mail, stealing an iPad, breaking and entering. I mean, these are almost trivial charges, considering the fact that congressmen and women were cowering behind, kind of armed guards in fear of their lives. So the question is,
okay, way to understand that. What we to understand was these are initial charges and that they're going to add on to them. That was my takeaway from watching the news as far as I could. So it wasn't so much a matter of white privilege, which I think Candy did allude to.
Okay.
And I may have indirectly, but a matter of we need to get these people charged, and once charged, we can then lay on more important charges. That's me sort of saying, okay,
sure.
I trust.
I've got that. I've got that. The question I'm coming to is that, look, this happened a week ago, last Wednesday. We're 10 days away from the event. If this had been an Islamic group who was responsible for this, 10 days later, we would have seen serious charges about what was going on. Secondly, the question is, do you think that wider society has now moved a step up in the way it recognizes the differential treatment of different people, in the way it recognizes that white privilege is real? Because actually, up until now, white privilege was something which a lot of people would dispute and argue with. Wendy.
Oh, I just finished talking. I do believe that it is now a matter of common awareness that there is such a thing that you can recognize as white privilege, even though people will deny it. People of color as well as white people. There are people of African descent who will say, no, that's just the way things are. And I know some of them. And so it's a matter of consciousness raising or awareness. So yes, I think it's a possibility, but it won't be the first time that the potential has come about, but then it's usually squashed after a while. There's some kind of concession made, and then after a while it fades away. I saw Candy shaking her head, so I'm just interested in what she thinks about that.
Well, no, I was going to come to Candy. Candy, is this something which is everybody's aware of and everybody's talking about? In fact, I've never heard the expression white supremacist and racist more than I have in the last 10 days. But is this something which is just going to fade away quietly again when the threat against the American establishment is over?
I think it will. I even think that these people who have been arrested are going to be let off in some way. We'll find ways of letting them off. I think that if they, white privilege does exist. It is just that whilst we're talking about Black Lives Matter, we're not talking about white lives are a threat to the Black life. We're not actually landing to say what we really think, and we're being very polite as they are being very polite. A lot of things are swept under the carpet, and situations are such that right now, there's a man, I've forgotten his name, it's because, I find the whole thing abhorrent, but he is arrested. He's one with the Viking hat on, and he's arrested and he's in prison, and his mother does make a plea that this guy is a vegan and he eats special, organic food. And it goes in front of the judge, and the judge says, give him organic food. Now, have you ever heard such a thing happen to a black person in America? No.
That's white privilege writ large. Yeah.
That is total white privilege. Have you ever heard such a thing happen to a black person in the UK? No, I live in the UK. This is not going to happen. However privileged you are, we've got ministers whose children are in prison, and these are children, ministers' children, or people who are set up so that their children trip up and then they put them in prison. There is no chance of them ever being given preferential treatment at all. They are made an example to society to show that if you mess up, you are going to go through this sort of suffering and punishment. Therefore,
who are these people? Sorry, who are these people you're talking about, Candy?
We can talk about Paul Boateng's son, for example.
I see. Yes.
I mean, I didn't want to talk about people because I'm in broadcasting, and you don't mention names unless you ask permission, etc. But I can tell you freely because it's been in the media and it's all over the place, and there are many more. But the point is that black people kind of always do not have. The minute it's white people, there's a small print somewhere, there's a loophole somewhere, there is an explanation somewhere. In America, a boy raped a girl, a white girl, not a black girl. I will not even go through the black suffering at all, but let us stay on track with white people hurting other white people. And then the explanation is given that, well, yes, he did rape her, but it will affect his future and his education if he goes to prison. Therefore, he did not go to prison. Now, then we're talking about gender issues here because the girl has suffered, she's gone through hell, and yet somehow it's her fault. Gaslighting, So now if you now transfer it into the black world, and a lot of evil is happening to black people up and down the world, not just America as a country, but the world as a whole. And we come to the UK, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And whenever America coughs, the UK catches a cold. So I don't even know where we're going with this because I don't know how this is going to affect us in the future.
Well, I mean, you've made the link for me so exquisitely there, Candy, because it's where I was going to come to. The lessons for us here as PAO, people of African origin, as black people in the United Kingdom, from what we're seeing happening over in America. Wendy, what should we do about the way we're differentially treated? Does this mean that black people need to talk up a lot more about white privilege? Is this the way to go?
Well, I don't know whether it's the way to go. I agree with a lot of what Candy said just now. I'm not so sure it's a matter of the US does something and then, coughs and then Britain sneezes, or the US sneezes and then Britain coughs. If you think about it historically, a lot of the ways that people behave in a supremacist country like the US, they learned it from the mother country, which was Britain. And so later on, so there's the roots of it. It's just that there wasn't a huge slave-owning population. There was some slavery, but not a huge slave-owning population.
Well, of course, Britain supplied all the slaves that went to most of the slaves.
And they profited from it, and it was the whole system then. Okay, so that system. So first of all, I would say that for speaking up, I don't know whether people have always spoken up. It's the same situation. They have spoken up. A lot of people. It is now coming into consciousness. You have to think about the number of the concentrations of black population, people of color, in the British Isles, for instance. The number of people, where they're come over time. in a sense, Britain got off easy. So you have white British people and some black British people either ignoring or saying it's not us.
Let's come to the point. Sure.
Yes.
Let's get to the point. I'm going to go back to Candy again now about this.
Okay.
Is that are we speaking up enough about it? Let me put this in some kind of context. Within our community, we have one or two very eloquent people who speak up vociferously all the time. Lee Jasper's one, for example. We have other advocacy groups which speak up. However, the vast majority of the people in the mainstream of society, the middle classes, the professional black people, are almost without exception mute. Now, that would be my observation. And it is within this context I ask myself, do black people speak up enough to advocate their own causes? Candy.
The thing about black people, can you hear me though? Because I cannot see myself.
I can. I mean, you look as if you're frozen a bit, but your voice
I am frozen.
Okay. Loud and clear.
Yes, you're frozen.
The UK is very careful about how it behaves towards black people. So there's always a token black person somewhere. I feel that the UK is a country where they are so aware of their racism that they have a kind of a lethal, deceptive closet behavior towards black people. So if they appoint one black person to be somewhere, that's it, that's enough. Interviews will be had, it's open, but they know that I'm taking any more black people. It's a thing. They do it all the time. And if you are in the system, you know what time of day it is.
So what you're saying is that effectively, if you have one person, one black person actually within a group of people who is appointed, elected, whatever, that person is as much there to be noticed as a black person as to keep other black people out. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, I'm not sure about as to keep other black people out, but as to be a reminder to pat themselves on the back that we've got. Well, you know, I know people who say, well, my best friends are black, and they mean the one person who they've allowed into their group.
And they can never remember their names. This is what always gets me, especially if they got African names, which I find hilarious.
What this brings to mind, I was asked about people of African origin were in the government, and then he switched to the South Asian population, you know, Priti Patel.
This was the health secretary, Hank.
Yes, I'm not mentioning names by him. And then he said, oh, but it's not a matter of diversity of cultures or races. It's diversity of you know, answer the question.
Well, he actually couldn't answer it, and
they always have one token. They take on one token person, and then there's no way that they flood it or they don't want. It just doesn't happen.
Okay, so what do you think is the way to address this issue of, one, not enough representation, two, kind of muted voices? Because I even have to ask the question that when people are elected to places like Parliament, you wonder why they're there. Because the moment they're elected, they have to speak up for everybody else. So it becomes a bit of a Pyrrhic victory when you have lots of black MPs, but they actually represent non-black people far more than they represent black people. How do we square that circle?
How can you square that? I'm sorry, I don't know if you're asking me or Wendy, but the question to you is, how do you square that? How do you square that? They are the people who are there is a position of power, and there are a few people on there, and they are determining who joins them, kind of thing. If you want to look at it that way, and the permission for you. And let me tell you something, that there are a lot of people in positions like MPs, ministers, etc., who are of color, who are careful not to be made an example of, not to be able, not to, they are even so grateful for their jobs that they're listening, they're there just to be prompted to say the right thing so that they do not lose that position. And I'm telling you, I'm saying this because I know that it is in every level. It's in even hospitals where doctors, nurses, everyone is careful about their position in their jobs, because if you mess up, there's another white person waiting for that job. You are lucky to be in that position in the first place. And unless, if you live here, UK, and I'm not talking about America, I'm talking about in the UK, where the racism is institutionalized to a fine tea, that is on earth, that you will sidestep or dare to say what is not deemed as correct
and appropriate. Well, let me ask the question then. I mean, Wendy, is this? Okay, hang on. But what I'm hearing from Candy is that, well, it's an open and shut case. Nothing can be done about it. Nothing is going to change. What's your view?
It's not an open and shut case, please. No.
No, hang on. I'm asking Wendy. So we'll come back to you. We'll come back to you in a minute, Candy. But Wendy, go on.
I largely agree with Candy, except my point is that the problems are structural. And for the recognition of the structural problems, the educational system, the colonial system, the post-colonial system, has systematically miseducated or uneducated both African people and non-African people, so that everyone has been miseducated to think that that's the way things should be. So that the issue is, it's structural. And then you were saying, is there a solution? It is understanding the system. As Candy has said, people are afraid to speak up, but that's because they have to survive. And the way the system operates, if you speak up, your survival is limited. And it has been shown historically that if you speak up, then yes. So it's a matter of consciousness about the system for both people of African origin and people of non-African origin who have equally been miseducated.
Sure. Okay. So Candy, let me come back to you. So it's not an open and shut case. There is a way forward. What is the way forward?
I think the way forward is, as someone said in the chat just now that I read while Wendy was talking, I have everything that Wendy said in the first instance. And I think that education is key. However, it's the way that our people are educated. Now, let me give you an example. If you go to a school where, the teacher is walking around and is teaching, let's say, maths or English or whatever, and they come to particular boys or girls and they help them with what they're writing, they help them with the spelling, and they leave that black child out. Then they have a PTA and the parents come to the school, and then they tell parents that, well, he's actually struggling, and so maybe sports is good. Maybe he can do sports. So his education academically is not, it doesn't help him. He doesn't understand it. He's not, so continually, or they say, oh, he's destructive, he's disruptive, he doesn't have attention. Now, if you move away from the UK, move away from America, and you go to Africa, the same kind of child goes there and does really well because the teacher is black, the headmistress is black, and they're not expecting him. He's not disruptive. Everybody's the same. Why is that? So by the time he comes back, he's smarter, he's more well behaved. He's not being expected to be a footballer or a runner or an athlete or whatever, and he's very academic. How does that work? It happens all the time. Now, for example, I am ashamed to say, but I had to educate my children in a fee-paying school, public schools. I sent them there, and I was like, hello, I was continuing the teach just to make sure that I'll tell you one truth. One day, my child was giving some homework, and it looked so familiar to me, and it's something I'd done before. And so I sat down and I did his homework for him, and he sent it to school, and he was given a 3/10 or something. I marched to the school, and I had a serious stiff discussion with the teacher, and I said, you must be out of your head. I've done this before. I did the homework, and it was a test to see what you meant. And there were so many apologies. I shouldn't tell the head teacher, etc., etc. Now, this is to demonstrate that if you don't pay attention, and there's so many Black people out there, let me tell you, there are.
And this isn't a fee-paying school. Yes. Where you're supposed to be given that extra bit of attention.
Yes, and I can tell you that there are no parents, Black parents, people from Africa especially, who are highly academic. They are doctors, whatever they are, but they come here and they are cleaners, etc., because they cannot get the job in the careers that they're educated in, and so they make sure that their children, even if they're in these just normal schools, they are watching their homework, they're helping their children, and these same parents are being told that their children are not good enough. Now, these are well-behaved children, etc., etc., and you think, what is going on? But I'll tell you, if we have to pay attention to our children, we have to.
Point taken. Got it. I mean, but essentially, you're telling a story about kids being adversely stereotyped and then it being fulfilled in the outcomes in their lives. But as you mentioned Africa.
Please, also, before we go to Africa.
Go ahead.
Just very, very quickly. Yes. There's a class issue involved here, because some of the children of parents who come here are the children of what I would call elite African educated people, but an increasing number of people who come have not had the privilege of having a good education. They don't understand the educational system. They are intimidated by the white persona, because that's all they've known from before they came here. And so they're not able to help their children with homework because they themselves have not reached the level of education that would be necessary. They don't understand the PTA system. They don't understand the way the system works. The teachers themselves are often not of the same racial or ethnic background as the children they teach, particularly children of African origin. And so what Candy was talking about, it goes on, but it's systemic. That's all I wanted to say about that.
Okay, good. Now, if I can go back to America and then switch over quickly to Africa again. We've seen that the people who mounted the insurrection were able to work very closely with the authorities at the Capitol, to the extent that many people are suggesting there was an inside job, that within the American establishment, the defense and policy establishment itself, there are a swathe of supremacists or supremacist thinking. Now, when it comes to dealings with Africa, how can people who have supremacists at their core ever hope to deal fairly with Africans, or deal with Africans with respect? Last hook is that the president himself said that Africa was full of S-hole countries. I don't want to empower it by repeating that vile phrase, but the president himself has said this. How can Africa ever expect to be treated fairly by America? Wendy? Hello? Wendy, can you hear me?
She's frozen.
Oh, she's frozen. Okay, fine. Candy, you go for it then.
Yeah.
How can America, how can Africa expect to be treated fairly by America?
Well, what do you mean by treated fairly? The history of the Black person moving into America is on such a negative and downtrodden way. They are not looked at as human beings. Americans, even the ones who educated themselves and sorted themselves out, and in Mississippi or wherever, they set up their own market force, and they had their own businesses, and they had their own banks, etc. Even they were maltreated. Somehow their banks, their businesses were burnt down, and in the end, the Black man was still in the same. One of the things that I have noticed also.
Are you talking about the Black Wall Street event?
Yeah, the Black Wall Street, yes.
Okay.
And one of the things that I have also noticed is that every time a Black man or the Black group or a few people make strides, then something happens and they're pulled back 7 or 20 years. They're pulled. There's always something going on.
Okay, so we know what the
these are the issues which we must look.
Right. Okay, so we've seen how the kind of the model for American behavior is. Surely there must be something that the Africans can do. Africans in Africa, they're sovereign people. I'm looking now for what the Africans need to do to improve their relationship with America.
Africa needs to learn. They do not understand racism. I'm telling you this freely. I'm not charging you for it. Africans do not.
You're very kind.
Africans in Africa understand racism. Racism, especially in the UK, insidious thing that you learn slowly, shock. And when you do, so here we are, we have these people came to Africa. Yes, they were evil and all of that, but they brought Christianity. We're supposed to be kind to each other, turn the other cheek, that. And then, and so they believe that. Now, the white people are gone, and in the majority of African countries, apart from South Africa, where they are, riding out countries part of, and they are there because of business, holiday, etc., etc. But when you leave there and you come here, you suddenly realize how insidious and how careful and how racism is a craft. It is something that when you find out what is going on, because there is something like, oh, this person doesn't like me. We have that. But when you find out that that is not it, but it is because of the color of your skin, it becomes a whole different ballgame.
Okay, Candy, let me go to Wendy. Let me go to Wendy now. Wendy, thanks for coming back. You've been hopping in and out a little bit. I think we've had some connection issues. But basically, Candy's saying that the way Africa needs to address its relationship with America in the first place is for Africa to understand what racism is. And she's gone into some detail explaining how nuanced, how clever, how subtle racism is. And that her theory is that people in Africa still, in modern times, they don't really understand what they're dealing with in racism. Can you shed light on that, Wendy?
You again.
Hello? Hello, Wendy? Oh, this is, I don't understand that. Okay, well, look, Candy, so, is Wendy still here? No, I'm sorry.
She's there,
We've
but
lost
she's
her again.
frozen.
Yeah, no, she's fallen out. She's going to have to log out and log back in again. But Candy, how do people become aware of how racism works in Africa?
We need to show them that this is what's happening. We need to talk to them about it. We need to. It's all education. Everything is
Who's
education.
We? Excuse me. Who is we?
You and I.
Yeah. Okay, great. Wendy, we'll come back. Okay.
Yeah,
give me a moment. Let me go to Wendy now that I've got her.
Yeah.
Candy's been talking about how people in Africa don't actually understand. Some don't even really believe that racism is as bad as people like you, I, or Candy may talk about. And so her thesis is that people in Africa don't really understand how racism works. How do we address that, Wendy?
Okay, so I have a slightly different take on it. I agree with everything she's saying, but I have a slightly more optimistic take. I think that if you go back to things like the pan-liberation movements, it's clear that some Africans are fully aware of what's going on or have been. They are fully conscious and they have fought against it. Others, through miseducation or, as she's saying, some form of ignorance, don't believe it. I mean, they think that presidents, or you should be respected, and it comes down to our cultural norms, where whoever is in authority is there by merit of that's there. I don't know whether it's divine. You look up to them, so you don't fight them. But from the experiences I have had, what I have seen, there are many people who are aware, coming from the Americas, this basic problem. And if you look at our leaders, the decades, usually they are of supremacy. They may not have called it supremacy, but our leaders have been silent. The population who have been completely either brainwashed or not given access to the information. And as for the elite, don't let me start because I'm of them, but I don't have any better.
So, no, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that? Because you're breaking up and I think you're making very, very important points. Say that again about the elites.
Oh, I was saying, after everything else I said, the problems we have is with the elites. Am I coming through? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are. Loud and clear now.
Okay. So with the elites, the least better, and I'm saying that one of the people who are the elite, they should know better. They are aware, but they aspire to the structure that in the long run keeps us all down. There's a lack of consciousness. There have been leaders in the past, and they have been silenced. So, if you got the beginning of what I was saying before I went all garbled, we have had African American, African, Pan-African voices that have spoken up, that understand, but their reach has been limited by the power structure.
Okay, I'm going to go to Candy. Candy, are you with us?
Yeah, but I'm frozen, but I can hear you.
Okay, I can hear you too. To what extent is mimicry, this mimicry that Wendy's just alluded to, a problem for Africans? Because you get the impression very much that, especially in the professional classes, in the political classes, it seems as if Africans are more interested in mimicking the luxurious lifestyles of people in the West than actually looking at, confronting, and solving the problems in front of them. For example, where is the health service? Where is the education system? Where is the infrastructure? What is tax revenue collection like? What is the situation for employment, particularly of young people? Africa's the youngest continent on the planet. But rather than judging themselves by this, I get the impression that the political classes and Africa's elites judge themselves by the brand of shirt they wear, whether it's a Ralph Lauren or a Thomas Pink, the kind of off-roader they like to drive, and the kind of home that they live in. Now, this is clearly not working. Candy?
Well, you know, all of that is true. All of what you said is true. From the Ralph Lauren to the off-roading and all of that. But what we don't realize is we have this attitude of peace. Ajo. We know, we Africans have been taught fear and incentive. And so there is this urge to get to a certain level in your society, in your whatever it is, whether it's politics or whatever, to get to a certain point with the westernized type of education. In fact, most of the elites, as Wendy was ascribing to, and a lot of the people have even forgotten that you can take a certain herb for a headache instead of paracetamol. They would rather take the paracetamol. So we've even forgotten all of these things. Now, these people are just mimicking, as you say, the Westerners. And in that way, they are not rocking the boat, because people have, and there are examples of heads of state that have gone against the Western world, who have been drugged to their death, and who have gone, I mean, Olympio, you know, and a lot of other people.
Tom Sankara, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba. The list is endless.
It's endless. And so what do you want? Peace? Do you just want to get, so they get to a certain point and they do all these things and they just, you know, educate their children abroad. Most of their children are stuck abroad, and all of us have examples. And then, you know, and that's it. But how long can we go on for? So there is where we are all kind of waking up. That is the necessity of being woke, the necessity of being aware of your surroundings. We have been lied to. Education is not right, and we need to do. We need to build our homes. Is different. We cannot do what the Western have done for all these years. We need.
Okay.
So, anyone out there? One out there?
Okay.
No.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid that with that, I have to bring this conversation to an end. Sometimes I always find myself ending it when it looks as if it's just warming up and beginning. So we looked tonight at how the insurrection in America showed us clearly the streak of supremacism and racism in the American polity, how the white privilege that white Americans enjoy over there is replicated right here in the United Kingdom. And we've also tried to take a look at what Africans can do to change this kind of relationship we have with, particularly with the United States, but with any other Western nation. I really hope that this gives food for thought for people. And please send your comments in. I'm unable to respond to them while we're on air because it takes all I can do to try and keep these two wonderful women pontificating here as they do with such deep thoughts and wonderful ideas. So I will get back to these messages later on, but this was just really the pilot edition of Speaking Up, and I hope to bring you many more in the future. All that remains is for me to say a wonderful thank you to Candy Kisei, broadcaster, Channel 7, and the lovely Dr. Wendy Adai. Amerophile and our oracle on all things American. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Are we off?